Well, I'm so excited to have Dr. Stephen Law here with us, someone who I've got to know a bit more over the last year, but I've long been an admirer of your work, both in popular philosophy and also in mature education of people who want to go back to school later in life, like myself. Dr. Stephen Law, pleasure to have you with us. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, thanks for inviting me on. Yeah.
No worries. I know it's a really busy time of year for you. Um, I just have to start with your story because it's so interesting how you got to be where you are today. So, could you tell us how you got into philosophy and how you got to where you are at the Institute for Continuing Education at Oxford University?
Yeah, sure. I have an unusual background for an academic because I was kicked out of school, actually, sixth form college. I signed up to do A levels at Long Road Sixth Form College in Cambridge, and things didn't go very well there, and I was asked to leave. I then did various other sort of manual jobs. I would help build the M11 actually. And then I had another go at trying to do some A levels, and I just gave up. Cambridge College of Art and Technology, as it then was. Then I was a postman for 4 years in Cambridge, delivering letters. Um, and while I was doing all of that, I got increasingly interested in sort of fairly sort of hippy dippy stuff, new age philosophy, and one thing led to another, and I ended up sort of discovering in my early 20s Western philosophy. And once I discovered that, Plato in particular, actually, that I realised that that's what I was really interested in, and so eventually applied to university as a mature student. um, and by some miracle, I managed to actually talk City University in London, talk them into accepting me onto the undergraduate philosophy program. And basically, I've just never left. I've just stayed with as a student, and then I moved to Oxford. I did the B.Phil, which is something that people very often do if they want a career in philosophy, which is a graduate degree. Then I did my doctorate at Oxford University. Then I was a research fellow for 3 years at the Queen's College, University of Oxford. Then I held various other lectureships at Oxford. Then I got a job at London University at Heythrop College, where I taught for 22 years. That then closed. I took early retirement, but then this job came up in Oxford, where I've been living this entire period since I started studying in Oxford. And the job involves sort of looking after the Certificate of Higher Education programme and philosophy at the Department of Continuing Education. And so that's what I'm currently doing. That's my current academic job. I also do other things. I edit a journal for the Royal Institute of Philosophy called Think Philosophy for Everyone. And I also organise a lot of events for Oxford Literary Festival every year. And I also, on their behalf, organise kind of school events as well at schools around Oxford. So quite a few activities that I'm engaged in.
Yeah, before we get to your many interesting books as well, I just really want to stay on this topic for a while because I love it, and it's everything this channel is about. Is you get kicked out of school, you have two go rounds at your A levels, and it just doesn't work out. You're laying tarmac, I assume, for the M11, and then you became a postman after that, didn't you?
Yeah, I wasn't actually doing a laying tarmac. I was what's known as a chain man, which was basically I was helping out the surveyors that were. So we'd go out and they'd get their theodolite out, and I'd wave a stick around, and
Now,
that's.
I always imagine if you're a postman or a chain man for a new motorway, you have a lot of time to think. But there's just so much hope and inspiration wrapped up in your story. that you go from that to doing your undergraduate degree and then your PhD at Oxford University, and now you're teaching at the Oxford University Mature College, and you're a lecturer in philosophy. I
Mm.
mean, your school teachers back when you were 13, 14 must be laughing their heads off at how it turned out. Uh, maybe
I don't
you
know if
weren't
they're going
maybe you weren't the student they would have picked to have your story.
maybe, maybe not. Yeah, I was. Yeah, I don't entirely blame Longroad Sixth Form College. I mean, I wasn't a very good student at that time. I fell off a cliff actually when I was 17
Gosh,
while I was during my yeah, because I got into climbing and I had a rock climbing accident which involved which was quite a bad accident actually. I mean, I was in hospital in Sheffield and I had to have this area here reconstructed, broke my jaw. I have a scar behind my hairline. Luckily, I've never gone
gosh,
bald, which is good because I've got a scar. It runs across there where they basically pulled my face off in order to sort of rebuild this area here because it all got sort of pushed in. Um,
gosh. So
and
you're lucky to
so,
be here.
yeah, so quite lucky, yeah. And that was also very disruptive, obviously.
Yeah, I can
That
imagine.
didn't help. Um, so yeah, for various reasons, it just didn't work out me in A levels. I didn't enjoy them. I found it incredibly boring, particularly the second attempt. I just had no interest in it. It just seemed completely pointless and a waste of my time, really. I felt like I was just being made to jump through various hoops. Um,
Did you do philosophy or religious studies when you were a young student?
no, I wouldn't have known what philosophy was at that time.
Wow. Were there any teachers along the way saying, "Come on, Stephen, you got a great mind. You could really be something." Sort of geeing you along.
Uh, I don't remember that. No,
Okay.
I don't think I particularly. I don't particularly. I don't think I particularly do have a great mind. I mean, I think I was. I have a bit of an aptitude for philosophy. It turns out. I didn't do particularly well at school. I did O. I did. I've got O levels, or GCSEs as they're now called. Um, seven of those. So I did all right, but I didn't really do any work for those either, to be honest. I don't know
Well,
what was going on in my head. I was a mess at that age. I think a lot of people, young people, are. It just took me a while to figure out what I was
yeah. Well, I
doing.
can I can so relate. I mean, we've got very similar stories. Obviously, I'm not a lecturer at Oxford University, or at least not yet. Maybe hopefully down the line. But here's the thing. I just feel like your story must be so inspiring, because how many people out there maybe are in a situation like you, who maybe missed a chance, or didn't go route A when they were in secondary school, but could come back round, can go back to school as adults. Why don't we jump to the Institute of Continuing Education? Tell us a bit about what it's like, and how students of any age can go to Oxford University and study for this certificate.
Right. Well, it's the Department of Continuing Education, which is, I believe, the largest department at the University of Oxford.
Wow.
But it's not particularly well known. It started in Victorian times, making sort of learning available to the general public, and they would go out into the country and put on lectures, and then people started coming to Oxford, and it sort of took off and has continued ever since. So now we're putting on a lot of courses in all kinds of topics, music and astrophysics, and some are level four, so it's the equivalent of first year undergraduate, and then there are sort of more advanced programs that you can do in courses, archaeology, architectural history. I've been interviewing people for that today. Most of the students, though, for the Cert AG, which is a kind of 2 to 4 year program that we run, equivalent to the first year undergraduate program, most of them are actually abroad. They're in the
Right.
States or in Australia and so on, and they're doing it online. They just have to attend one thing in person, which is usually a summer school for a week
Yes.
in Oxford. So, but then we also have lots of people from the UK, and we're also teaching in person. I teach classes in person in Oxford. People come to those maybe of a weekday evening or something. And then we have stuff going on at the weekends, events. I'm doing one on, what am I doing it on? I'm doing one on how to raise good citizens in a couple of weeks, actually.
Yeah, something you've written quite a bit on.
Yeah.
Yeah, even though it's Oxford University, what are the kind of entry requirements to study at the continuing education department?
Anyone can sign up without any form of qualifications whatsoever. You can sign up for a course. You can just sign up, do the course, 10-week course, say, or a summer school or whatever it may happen to be. For the Certificate of Higher Education, again, there's no formal requirement. You just need to convince us, really, that you're capable of doing it and that you have. And that's why we interview every single candidate. I think interviewing is very useful because people who look on paper to be perhaps not the strongest candidate that might get rejected, actually, after an interview, you suddenly realise this person's extremely good, actually, and should definitely be given the opportunity.
Yeah,
So
not
that
enough, not
happens
enough
quite
people.
often.
Sorry, go ahead.
That happens quite often, and that's how I got into university. Really, I suspect I was interviewed, and I was able to convince the academic at interview that I could do it, and I was let in. On paper, I just looked like a nightmare. I mean, why on earth would why on earth would you accept me? So I think interviewing is a really good thing. It's very time consuming. Spent all day today, all day yesterday, and the next few days I'm going to be interviewing.
Yeah, well, I'm delighted that so many people, even though it makes a lot of work for you, are
Hmm.
pursuing higher education later on in life. I think people just don't know what they're capable of. And
Very true.
not enough people realize that there's Oxford University's continuing education department or
Hmm.
Madingley Hall at Cambridge, where you can study as a mature student at weekends or online,
Yeah,
or the summer schools that you do. You know, people can get an Oxford and Cambridge education and transform their life, even if they don't have the glowing A levels. And
no.
yeah,
I mean, what you do need is some money, though. I mean, to be fair, it would be great if all of this stuff was, properly funded by the state and so on,
yes,
made accessible to people, and it really isn't. Um, and so inevitably we have to charge fees that are, a bit steep for some people. Although there are kind of bursaries and so on. But it would be great if we could make it more generally available um, to people that maybe are,
yeah. So
yeah,
you do your doctorate at Oxford University despite your colourful journey to it,
yeah.
and then you become a philosophy lecturer. So tell us about your career, your early career after getting your PhD at Oxford.
Oh, okay. Well, I was a junior research fellow at the Queen's College for 3 years while I was doing my PhD. And then I finished the PhD. I think I did a couple of lectureships, maybe Oriel College, Worcester College. Then I got a job, University of London, Heythrop College, and I was based there, commuting to London 2 or 3 days a week, or however many days I needed to during the term. Teach there. Heythrop College was a very strange institution. It was College of the University of London, had been since the mid 1970s, but in fact it was a Jesuit foundation founded in 1614 in Louvain in Belgium.
Wow.
And it kind of moved around and ended up as part of the University of London. At one stage before that, it was in a village in Oxfordshire called Heythrop, which is why it's called Heythrop College. Um, so we're a Jesuit institution. I had Jesuits as colleagues. I think some of them looked at me and thought, "What the hell are you doing here?"
Yeah, yeah, you're not much of a Jesuit, Stephen, for those who don't know.
No, it's the sort of the intellectual wing of the Catholic Church. Um, I I um, I enjoyed it there. What was really good actually about Heathrow College was that also they interviewed everyone. And they also had a sort of Oxbridge style system where you got a one-to-one tutorial for every piece of work that you wrote, which is invaluable, particularly in philosophy. So we were really very good at sort of value added. We were taking people that perhaps didn't have particularly great A levels, and yet they were, they were coming out outperforming very often students at King's and UCL and so on.
Wow.
Um, so we were good at it. But then the Conservative Party made some changes to how adult education is funded, and that was very bad news for this small college, which only really taught philosophy and theology and a bit of psychology. And although it had just had its 400th birthday, 3 years later, it had ceased to exist. It was put out of business basically by the government, by the changes that the government introduced.
Well, that's tragic. A lot of
Yeah.
universities are facing hard times at the moment, and
Yes.
it's
Again.
yeah,
Mm,
it's
yeah.
tragic when this happens. Um, but but you then ended up at Oxford, teaching this and doing what you're doing.
Mm,
Let's get into your particular philosophies, because what I love about you is you're quite broad. You do a lot of different disciplines. You do philosophy of mind, you do epistemology, obviously philosophy of religion. You've done some metaphysics. You're quite the generalist in terms of how you've published. Do you have anything you're particularly proud of, or what's your favorite branch of philosophy?
no. Well, it varies. My interests move about, and that's probably why I've got fairly wide interests. Also, it helps if you've done the B.Phil at Oxford, because that forces you to be a bit broader. You have to kind of do three different areas, three papers. So I did philosophy of mind, later Wittgenstein, and focusing on the later stuff. And what else did I do? I did um, metaphysics. So I had a fairly broad knowledge already, and I just kind of kept that up. Really, that's what happened. And then I got into philosophy of religion, possibly because I was at Heythrop. But I've always been very interested in, as I mentioned earlier, I was a bit of a hippie and into the New Age stuff. So I've always been kind of interested in that side of things, the sort of airy fairy spiritual side of things. At one stage, I really leant in that direction, and then I became sort of old and cynical. uh,
Well, I like it because so much of the time you're forced to specialize by your education, but you've
mm.
managed to, and I suppose teaching in the Department of Continuing Education, it's allowed you the opportunity to stay involved in lots of different branches and teach lots of different
Yeah,
personalities.
they're very good. I mean, basically, I can do what I like. Really, I'm very lucky. I can, as long as it's approved, I can do it. So, I've taught all sorts of bits and pieces, all sorts of stuff. Um, my, so I've researched in, so I started off doing my doctorate. I was focused on philosophy of language and metaphysics, and in particular, essentialism, which sounds very dry and technical, but actually, when you get into it, there were some very, very exciting developments in the middle of the 20th century, connected with the philosophers Saul Kripke and Hilary Putnam in particular. And once you've kind of got your head around what they had to say about how language works and how names attach to things, for example, suddenly all sorts of bizarre consequences follow. Um, so things that you wouldn't have dreamed would follow. So, for example, given what they have to say about philosophy of language is correct, so it follows that if Sherlock Holmes doesn't exist, then he couldn't possibly exist. In no possible world does Sherlock Holmes exist, which seems just kind of ludicrous. The same goes for hobbits and unicorns. Um, That's one strange consequence. Another is that people have traditionally thought of philosophy as an armchair discipline, like maths or geometry. You sit in your armchair and you can do it. It's not an empirically based, observation based activity. And it's also been thought that philosophy essentially deals with what's essential and necessary rather than contingent. Science, on the other hand, is concerned merely with establishing how things actually are. That the phone is on the table, that the Earth goes around the sun, that kind of thing. So again, if these views about philosophy of language are correct, it turns out that actually science is capable of establishing necessary truths, as necessary as 2 + 2 = 4. Again, and one of these truths is that water is H2O. And another one is that gold has the atomic number 79. And again, this sounds bizarre to most philosophers, or it certainly did at the time. I mean, how could scientists establish that in every possible world water has a particular chemical composition? It can establish it does have a certain chemical composition, but it can't establish necessary truths. You can't establish what's essential about, that's the business of philosophy and armchair reflection. So again, this was revolutionary.
Yes.
So I got very excited about all of this stuff, and ended up writing my doctoral thesis on it. If anyone's interested, I wrote an article for Aeon magazine, AEON, which is available free online. If you look up the thing I wrote on Kripke, Kripke, I think it's called The Importance of Kripke or something like that. I can't remember what it is. It explains exactly why all of this revolutionary stuff in philosophy of language and then metaphysics is actually very relevant to a lot of contemporary political debates. I mean,
Sure.
like trans issues or racial issues. So, for example, the idea that what it is to be a woman is fixed by some sort of underlying biology rather than, say, your appearance or how you identify. That part of the issue there is an issue about how words function. I mean, what they latch onto and how we're using them. So it's extremely relevant. I mean, whichever way you want to jump on that, right? You really need to know about the philosophy of language involved there.
It seems to be like a universal acid that sort of erodes and breaks down everything it touches. I
Yeah,
mean, is
and then
Wittgenstein
other
to
issues like
blame for
yeah,
ruining philosophy forever?
yeah, and then race. What makes somebody Afro-American or something like that, and or a white person? Is it their appearance? Is it some sort of underlying genetic thing? Is it their geographical origin? From where their ancestors came. Exactly which of these various things is it that makes you, a white person or an African American or whatever it is? Again, really interesting questions. And again, if you don't know anything about how language works, you're all at sea. You're not going to know where to start in coming to an answer. Or you're probably going to come to the wrong answer or a silly answer.
Well, I have a good friend who's doing their PhD in linguistics at the University of
Hmm.
Manchester. It seems like philosophy of language and linguistics are really hot right now. For the general layperson, can you give a succinct, brief definition of essentialism?
Well, one of the things I do in the article uh, in Eon is spell out that actually the word is used in a variety of different ways, all of which get muddled up. And so there's an awful lot of arguing at cross purposes. The kind of essentialism that I was working on is the essentialism which says that you can use, so someone like John Locke, the famous Enlightenment philosopher, thought that a word like gold is really a sort of stands in for a complicated description, like the substance that's yellow and malleable and fusible and so on. And so something would be gold if and only if it ticks each of those boxes. That's what makes it gold. So, on the basis of observation, then you can establish whether or not something's gold. Similarly with water, something is water if it's clear, thirst quenching, boils at 100 degrees centigrade, and so on. But what Kripke and Putnam suggest is that actually the word water, for example, doesn't sort of stand in for a description. What it does is it reaches behind the scenes and latches onto a certain unknown constitution. Back in 1750, Locke didn't know what that underlying constitution was. We now know that there is one, it's H2O. Kripke and Putnam are of the view that we introduced the word water to latch onto that underlying constitution. So that even if something was not clear and thirst quenching, as long as it was H2O, it was water. And similarly, conversely, if something was clear and thirst quenching at 100 degrees centigrade and so on, but wasn't H2O, then it wasn't water. And this was true even back in 1750. So the essence of water was discovered by science and was hidden, was revealed by empirical investigation. And these terms are not just sort of stand-ins for complicated descriptions. Is the basic idea. And so you can see why then that would be relevant to, not all words function in that way. Some do. I think water and tiger and so on do function in that way. The word spoon, on the other hand, doesn't. I mean, what makes something, if there's a spoon, what makes something a spoon is just the fact that it's, a particular shape and is used in a particular way. And so it could be made out of metal. This one's made out of stainless steel. It could be made out of plastic. It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter exactly how it's put together. Well, as long as it's got that basic function, it's a spoon, right? So it's the familiar characteristics that we all learn about when we learn what a spoon is that actually make it a spoon. But that's not true of water. You can learn about what water is. It's clear and thirst quenching and boils 100 degrees centigrade, but you haven't got the essence yet. For the essence, you need to engage in a scientific investigation. And now you can see why questions about, woman, that word, what does that lash on to? The sort of the underlying, some underlying biological feature or more superficial characteristics such as breasts and sexual organs and so on, or is it something you can just identify as? If you say you're one, then you are one. I mean, these are questions that are at least illuminated by these kind of thoughts about how words function, whichever way you want to jump.
And people say that philosophy, is just a subject that doesn't really matter in terms of modern day-to-day stuff. I mean, it couldn't be more wrong.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it is a bit abstract and it's hard to see the point of it, but and I still enjoy it. I think that philosophy is fun, whether it's useful or not. However, it turns out to be quite a lot more useful than you might have imagined.
Well, Mark Twain said that all men are philosophers. And why don't you just make a case here as to why people of any age should study philosophy, or at least read some?
Okay. Well, I wouldn't necessarily go away and start reading, Kierkegaard or something, Kant, because that's probably going to be very off-putting. Read one of my books. Get a good
Yes, read one of
introduction.
Stephen Law's books.
Yeah, get a good introduction to something philosophical. The reason why it's good to think about philosophy is, well, first of all, it's fun. I mean, I really enjoy it. I mean, I just love digging down to the foundations and poking around down there and seeing what's going on. Children naturally ask why, and then when you provide an answer, they ask, but why? And it doesn't take long before you're running out of answers, and they're kind of dug down and are getting into the sort of philosophical nitty gritty. And at that point, we often just want them to shut up because it's kind of embarrassing to admit that we don't really know ultimately the answer to some of these questions. But that's really the fun stuff, so far as I'm concerned. Some people find that terrifying. I mean, it's a bit like, somebody pulling the rug out from underneath you. You thought you were on firm ground. You thought you knew where you stood, and suddenly you realise that you're all at sea and you don't actually know what you thought you knew, and the things that you had taken for granted no longer look very secure at all. And some people find that exciting, and other people find it terrifying, quite frightening experience. So they're not really going to enjoy philosophy, probably. Why is this useful? Well, finding out about, the presuppositions that you're making and so on, that can be really useful. You can learn a lot about yourself. You can learn about your own prejudices and biases, cognitive
Yeah,
biases, and so on.
absolutely.
It will lead you astray. You can start to identify those and see, where you're potentially vulnerable. You can find discrepancies in what it is that you believe. Maybe you believe that sentient. Maybe you think it's okay to kill and eat cows, but then you believe other things that actually, if you think it through, have the consequence that you really shouldn't be killing and eating cows. Certainly not just because they taste good. And so you're stuck with these kind of moral dilemmas that you need to resolve. And in fact, that's how moral progress is made, through people asking difficult questions and thinking things through and realizing that the positions that they've taken, that perhaps everyone thought were fine. Slavery, we all know slavery's fine. We all agree. It takes a few brave individuals to start asking some difficult questions and pressing those kind of questions for moral progress to be made. So that's a valuable thing. Research has been done into the backgrounds of those who rescued Jews during Nazi Germany and did the right thing even when it was dangerous to do so. And it turns out that what really marks out the rescuers from the non-rescuers was they had been raised to think and question and take responsibility for making their own moral judgments, not just passively accepting what others had told them. If you want to raise good citizens that will do the right thing in even the most difficult circumstances, and that won't just be vulnerable to the next charlatan that comes along, the next self-styled authority that tells them, charismatic authority that tells them what they should believe and what they should do. If you want people that have some immunity to that kind of BS, the most effective way of doing that is to raise them to be a bit philosophical, to think and question and take responsibility. That was what marked out the rescuers from the non-rescuers. Not really religion. People often say, it was religion, it was religious people. No, it wasn't really religion. That had a small effect, but what really marked out rescuers from non-rescuers was they had been raised in that kind of way. So it makes for a healthier society, I think. People that have a bit of philosophical training are, it turns out, measurably more intelligent. They've done research with P4C style philosophy in the schools, where they get the kids around in a circle and they discuss a topic and there's interaction between them. That's been done many times now. Various pilot studies have been done. There was one in Clackmannanshire, I think it was, where they discovered that the kids that had been exposed to that on a regular basis over the course of a year were measurably more intelligent than the kids that hadn't, in the control groups. And the culture in the schools that was doing that was also better. There was less bullying. There was greater respect between the pupils and so on, as a result of them having been exposed to this kind of collective discussion where everyone listens to other people and takes their opinion, responds to it, criticises it, and so on. It's just a really good way of raising smart, intelligent, moral people. It seems to me.
Yeah, it's so essential that young people are taught critical thinking in schools. I just
Yeah,
feel like it's more essential than ever. And I wish more
absolutely. Yeah.
schools offered philosophy at A level than currently
Yeah.
do.
You've got to do it the right way. It's possible to really put people off critical thinking if you just give them like tedious little logic puzzles. It can be quite off-putting. Whereas if you kind of you make it a bit more accessible to them. So kids, for example, are always interested in spooky stuff, ghosts and flying saucers and alien abduction, anything like that. They love it, and so there's a perfect opportunity then for you to you know, get them thinking critically about these kind of issues. That's not the sort of thing that would normally get covered in school. In fact, people would steer clear of it. But actually, it's kind of really good subject matter, insofar as getting people to sort of sharpen up their critical thinking skills.
No, I suppose not. I think the last time I checked, philosophy A-level syllabus that I'm familiar with had a paper on ethics, a paper on epistemology, a paper on philosophy of mind, and a
Mm.
paper on philosophy of religion. And I feel like that's a pretty good breadth there. But it's
Mm.
just so important, isn't it, today, especially with echo chambers and algorithms, that people critically assess their own beliefs, the origin of them, and because everyone believes something that's not true, and everyone believes more things that aren't true than they're aware of. So
So,
so
mm.
philosophy can act as sort of a safeguard to it, or at least a first line of defense. Do you think?
Yeah, I think it can. I think you're going to be less. I'm not saying you're going to be immune. You're, you're not. But if you've been raised to think and question, got into the habit of kind of just taking a step back and thinking, hang on a minute, why do I believe that? Or why should I believe this person? Or what actually is their authority? Or what actually is the evidence for that, if any? People that tend to ask those kind of questions are rather more immune to being, misled, psychologically manipulated, reduced into some toxic belief system and so on. That's the right way to give people some immunity to that kind of potentially dangerous indoctrination. Unfortunately, a lot of people think that the right way to give people immunity to indoctrination is just to get your own indoctrination in first.
Yeah, yeah,
That was unfortunately a response. A few years ago, the Tony Blair's government wanted to introduce citizenship classes, and he wanted citizenship classes introduced to give people some immunity to certain kinds of belief system they thought were toxic. Relativism was everyone was worried about relativism, and and the way that worked was they basically just identified the values that they thought we all share, British values, maybe whatever they are, the sort of the apple pie stuff that we can all sign up to. Let's figure out what that is, what all of the different religious people and so on can agree to, and we just tell the kids that, right? We're just giving them that stuff in classes, and then they'll be immune to just being told what to believe. But that's just telling them some stuff. You kids, you believe this, and we're telling you because look, it's not just me; it's the rabbi and the imam. We all agree that this is the truth, so you go away and just believe that because we're telling you, right? It's the worst possible way of raising young people to sort of think and question, and not just rely on what other people are telling them, no matter how grandiose they might seem. So, self-styled authorities and self-styled experts telling them what they should believe. That you want to encourage people to be a bit wary of people that, particularly when
yes.
particularly when it comes to morality and religion.
Maybe we need a few more philosophers in government, Stephen. Maybe that would help. Or what? Yeah, maybe. Let's get to your writing here. Um, what was your first book that you wrote, and when did it come out?
Oh, so my first book was The Philosophy Files, and it came out in the year 2000, and that was a book that I read a chapter of it for fun, and then it kind of got stuck in a drawer. And it's just it's a book aimed at kids, and it was a book that I wrote for my earlier self, the kind of book that I would have really enjoyed reading
Wow.
when I was a youngster. That just explored the kind of questions that I was really interested in back then, like how do I know that my parents aren't robots or virtual, or that this, what makes things right or wrong? Is there a God? All of the classic questions that kids are interested in, and it just explores these and gives them some of the arguments one way and another or the other, and it uses dialogue, and it's got images and bad jokes and so on, and that really did quite well, that book, and so took off there. And that book
And
was
this is
re-released.
again going into your breadth. You've written a book for children. You've written for secondary school students. Essentially, obviously, you teach at a university age, and you've written for grown-ups. You really kind of got the breadth because I know you've obviously done some discussions in secondary schools for me, and you've
Yeah.
been involved in some of the stuff behind the formulation of the curriculum, if I'm right there. I certainly know some of your material has been used for curriculum.
The philosophy file has been adopted by one of them. I can't remember which one. And yeah, so I know I'm very interested in. Obviously, I want to make sure that it's done well, in school. Yeah. No, written quite a few books. I have never really written an really academic book. I've written various academic papers. I have got a contract with Oxford University Press to write a very academic book, which I've had now for several years because I got the contract just before I was made redundant because of the closure of Heythrop College, and and I said, look, I don't think I'm going to be doing this right now. And they said, well, that's fine. Come back to us if and when you want to write this book. So at some stage, I might actually do that. But the thing about writing a book like that is it's only ever read by about 10 people.
Yeah, if
And
your
then,
academic book sells in the three figures, you've done well, haven't you?
yeah, I mean, maybe I'd do better than that. I don't know. But clearly the other books, some of the other books have reached a much, much, much wider audience. And in some ways, maybe that's a better use of my time. I discovered the other day, actually, that I read a book about bullshit, believing bullshit, and the way in which
Yeah.
we can be misled and seduced into believing all sorts of nonsense. And that book, it turns out, is used with prisoners in
Really?
Belmarsh High Security Unit.
Well, that's a great use of your work. I'd take that as a real compliment.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to Belmarsh High
Oh
Security Unit
gosh. Okay.
in a few weeks as a result of that. So that was quite. So that was really. I was very pleased about that. Obviously, it's nice to
Yes,
find out that your books are being used in these different ways.
that's outstanding. And
Whereas
I
if
I get the sense from reading your work that you really enjoy writing for a popular audience.
yeah, I
Um,
do. Yeah, it's fun. Yeah.
and that's a real skill, being able to conceptualize ideas for anyone, making them accessible to anyone.
Yeah, turns out I've got a bit of an aptitude for that, so I've just made the most of it. Yeah.
Do you sense when you're doing it that you're writing for 24-year-old Stephen or 23-year-old Stephen when you're writing?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, certainly with the philosophy files, I was definitely writing for my earlier self. I was writing the book that I wish had been around because there simply wasn't a good introduction for young people to philosophy that was, a fun introduction. Around about the time that book came out, Justin Gardner's Sophie's World came out, which
Oh
was
yes, wow.
supposed to do that. Yes. Um, but I didn't really enjoy Sophie's World very much. I found it quite dull. But it certainly did get, that was just my reaction to it. It certainly did get a lot of people interested in philosophy, which is a good thing. Yeah.
You're in charge of the journal Think now, and Think is quite an interesting journal because, if I remember correctly, references and footnotes and all that aren't really allowed or aren't
Well,
encouraged.
they're allowed, but they're discouraged. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, we do, and in fact, we've changed a bit. So we kind of relaunch, and after the relaunch, I did get stricter about notes and references. I do say, if at all possible, let's just not include them. Now it's color illustrated, which is nice, and um, I'm being a lot more proactive about the content. I'm writing some of the content myself. So Think Philosophy for Everyone, Journal of the Royal Institute of Philosophy. You can take out a subscription, comes out 3 times a year. There's a school subscription, actually, which would give
yeah,
you, if you're a teacher, and all of your pupils access to the entire back catalogue, which actually is pretty amazing, the back catalogue. I mean, I was looking at it the other day thinking, oh my God, I'd completely forgotten that I got Anthony Flew to write
gosh, wow.
um, about his supposed uh, change of heart on theism, right? Because I knew him a little
That
bit.
was
So
about 20 years ago now, wasn't it? About
yeah,
20
yeah.
years.
I mean, I'd completely forgotten that I'd done that, and I just discovered this. I thought, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I got him to do that. And then, yeah, I mean, I've got all sorts of people to contribute to Think over the years, and you get access to all of that if you take out a school subscription, which is the same price as a individual one, £29 a year or something. Yeah, so that's my plug for I think.
It's terrific. I joined Trip, the Royal Institute of Philosophy, and got my subscription to Think a couple of months ago, and I enjoyed it. I think I read your article on a good citizen, being
Oh
a
yeah,
good citizen. Recommend it to everyone. Again, I feel it's very accessible, and it's trying to do a philosophy journal in a different way. You know, rather than a very dry, lots of references, lots of footnotes and stuff like
yeah,
that. It's a fantastic effort. I really like it. Um,
yeah,
with mentioning Anthony Flew, I feel like that's a good segue into philosophy of religion, because you are very well known. I know you've talked about this loads and loads and loads, but let's squeeze in a little bit of it. You're very well known for your evil God argument. Um,
yeah,
yes, could you tell us about the evil God argument? Sort of give us the elevator version of the evil God argument.
yeah. Well, I think the way I now tend to explain it is this. It's an analogy, and it's an analogy which I use as a sort of spell breaker um, for those who have managed to convince themselves that belief in an all-powerful and all-good God is not unreasonable. You know, it's not a ludicrous belief like believing in Santa or fairies. It's much more reasonable than that. Um, I'm really not sure that it is any more reasonable than those other beliefs. I think it probably is a pretty ludicrous belief. However, if you try and persuade people that it's really not a very sensible thing to believe, if you come up with them with the usual standard arguments, you know, maybe the evidential problem of evil, for example, how could you believe in a good God given the quantity of pain and suffering that exists and has existed on the face of this planet over literally millions of years? Um, Surely you can't really square that with the existence of a supremely powerful and benevolent creator. Um, the trouble is that if you come at people with that sort of argument, they're ready for you. I mean, they've had literally thousands of years to cook up all sorts of ingenious, you know, some of the world's greatest minds have been cooking up ingenious ways of trying to defend theism from these kind of attacks, and also to bolster it. You know, people are coming up with arguments for God. And so, because they're really ready for you, they have this fantastic kind of fortress, which is extremely difficult to sort of kind of to break in. So really, the idea of the evil God challenge is to sneak around the back rather than come at them head on. So what I do is I point out another belief that you could hold, which is that there's a supremely powerful and malevolent God, just the one God, that's in charge of the universe, and this is his creation. Who believes that? Well, no one. Well, why? Why? Because it's a ludicrous thing to believe. Because you know, look around you. There's too much love, laughter, ice cream, rainbows for this to be the creation of a supremely powerful and malevolent creator. Abundant evidence that whatever intelligence behind the universe exists, if any, it's not supremely powerful and all evil. I mean, that's just absurd. Um, and most people go, yeah, of course it is. I mean, no one believes that. That's ridiculous. But then you point out that actually most of the most popular arguments for God are neutral on his moral characteristics. You know, if you've got a design argument, maybe there's a cosmic designer. Why does the designer have to be all good? Well, he doesn't. I mean, or if you think there's a first cause or prime mover, why does it have to be all good? Well, it doesn't, very obviously. There are some arguments specifically for a good God, but the most popular ones tend to be neutral on the moral characteristics of God. So you know, that's the first concern. So those could be arguments for an evil God. Then, in fact, you can even, if you're with a bit of ingenuity, you can even run a sort of an ontological argument for an evil God. Anyway, so here's one. I can conceive of a maximally evil being. Right. Now, if that being existed in my imagination only, that wouldn't be nearly as evil as if he existed in reality. Therefore, given that it's the maximally evil being that I'm conceiving, he must exist in reality.
It's
That's
a
just
very clever way of sort of inverting a lot of the traditional arguments. for the existence of God, and
Yes.
also pushing back on the responses to the problem of suffering, the theodicies
That's
that are well
yes. So
known.
that's in fact where usually spend most of my time. I look at the theodicies that he used to defend belief in a good God from the problem of evil, and I construct mirror theodicies to defend belief in an evil God from the problem of good. So why does an evil God allow some people to go around helping other people? Uh, well, free will. He's, he could have created us puppet beings that always did the cruel and despicable thing. But if you're a puppet being, you're not morally responsible for what you do, and what you do will not be morally evil. Now, an evil God will want moral evil to exist in the universe, it's the worst kind of evil. So he has to cut our strings so that we can freely choose to do evil. As a result of him cutting our strings, some of us choose to do good, reduce suffering. He doesn't like it. It's the price he pays for the very great evil of moral evil existing in the universe. Now, that's just the standard Christian theodicy flipped. And then you can run other ones. You can say, well, this is, Christians say this is a veil of soul making, in the style of John Hick.
John Hick, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, we suffer, but we grow and develop morally and spiritually as a result of the suffering through which we put. Obviously, problems with this because this suffering has been going on for hundreds of millions of years before we even show up. I mean, was God building the character of the dinosaurs? I don't have no idea.
Or the amoebas or the bacteria, and yeah.
But anyway, you can then run a kind of mirror theodicy now to defend belief in an evil God.
Yeah.
You can say he gives us good things to sort of destroy our characters. So he gives us ice cream, so that it's lovely, but then we get fat, and then we have a heart condition, and then we die anyway as a result. For example, this is a veil of soul destruction. Why does he give us children to love, who love us unconditionally return? Well, so he can kill them on an industrial scale over the 300,000 years human beings been on the planet. Your chances of making it to adulthood are not much better than 50-50. Ask any parent that's lost a child what's the worst thing they've ever experienced. They'll probably say that is. So of course an evil God will create children, and of course an evil God will create love to maximize evil, to maximize pain and suffering. It's part of a character destroying mechanism. So you can flip the theodicies like this, and of course when you do it, people snigger and think it's quite amusing, because it is. It's just ludicrous, and that's the point.
It
He is.
shines a light, doesn't it? It shines a light
Yeah.
on the challenges. I think it's been a really interesting contribution to philosophy of religion.
Yeah. I
Uh,
don't claim to have invented it, actually.
no, I
Well,
know.
I did invent it, and then I was disappointed to find other people had come up with a similar thought, one or two at least.
I think you've synthesized it and explained it really well in a way that's very
Maybe.
accessible to
Yeah.
everyone. So
Yeah. Anyway, I'm associated with that now for good or ill. Yeah.
yeah, I'd like to just ask you to finish. Who really inspired you, um, both in terms of your academic journey and in terms of pursuing philosophy, and pursuing it to the extent you had. I know you got into it initially the way you did, but then to go the distance and now work in academic philosophy. Who were your great inspirations along the way?
Uh, I had some great lecturers as an undergraduate at City University. If I had to single one out, I'd single out Arden Lyon because he was prepared to sort of sit with you for like a couple of hours, in his office and just have a chat with you and just talk things through. And that is absolutely,
Wow.
invaluable. Um, so yeah, that was extremely helpful. And then I've had some great teachers at Oxford. I'm a big fan. If we're looking at sort of historical figures that have really had an influence on me, Kripke, I mentioned already.
Yes.
Later Wittgenstein. Currently, a lot of people are not very keen on. Anthony Grayling, who I know quite well, actually,
Oh, yeah.
really not a fan of whereas I'm a huge fan of the later Wittgenstein. And again, you can find things that I've written. So later Wittgenstein on religion, I don't really agree with it at all, but it's quite interesting. And again, there's an article in Eon on Wittgenstein and philosophy of religion and atheism that I've written. If you're interested in a quick introduction to Wittgenstein on philosophy of religion, check that out. So yeah, I keep coming back to Wittgenstein.
And
I was
we've
taught
met.
by, I was taught by Peter Hacker, who's probably king of the Wittgensteinians, when I was at Oxford. And although I disagree with quite a lot of Wittgenstein, I still think that there's some absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean the king of Wittgenstein mountain is a mountain a lot of people want to be on top of. Um, we mentioned your books. We've mentioned the Oxford Department for Continuing Education. Where's the best place for people to find your work and to read some more of your stuff?
Well, you can just go find the books very easily. If you're interested in exploring philosophy, I would start with my book, The Philosophy Gym, 25 Short Adventures in Thinking. I still think that's a pretty good book. I'm really quite pleased with it. Where I'm writing it now, I changed one or two things, but the basic idea is good and it's quite fun. And it's certainly helped bring a lot of people into philosophy, as has the Philosophy Files, now called the Complete Philosophy Files, which I wrote for kids, but a lot of adults have read it. A lot of philosophers have told me over the years that that book got them into philosophy.
Wonderful.
Possibly,
What a compliment.
yeah, yeah. So I've corrupted the youth. Socrates was famously accused of this,
Yes.
and so I really have done my bit in terms of corrupting the youth and getting them to start
Well, hopefully
philosophy.
no one's slipping hemlock into your drink or anytime soon or anything like that.
Well, no, one or two people might like to, but
One or two, maybe. Well,
yeah,
Stephen, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for what you do for public and popular philosophy, and thanks for your work. And really encourage people to look up, in particular, the Oxford Continuing Education Department and think about going back to study, because you're proof that you can go to it later on and it can change your
mm,
life. And I love that.
yeah. And you can sign, you could just sign up for one course and do it online.
Yeah.
And you can be synchronous or asynchronous, as we say. So you can be in a different time zone. It doesn't matter because it's all done online. Or there are the short online courses that have a kind of a scheduled slot where everyone kind of comes together at a particular time. So then you don't want it to be in the middle of the night. So that tends not to suit people in certain parts of the world. But yeah, we have all sorts of stuff on offer. Check out the website, and also if you're near Oxford, you could sign up for a 10-week course, even with me in person.
Yeah. It'd be a great use of your summer as well. Yeah, absolutely. It'd be a great use of the summer as well. The summer programs that happen there, and
Yeah, yeah. I'm not teaching one this summer. I did teach one last summer. I'll probably teach one next summer. I am teaching day courses and weekend courses as well. As I mentioned, I've got one coming up on raising good citizens in a few weeks' time, and I've got lots more coming up. So, yeah.
brilliant. Thank you so much, Stephen. I really appreciate how generous you are with your time and love your work. Thank you very much.
No, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Stay tuned for more amazing conversations with incredible researchers who are changing the world we live in and driving humanity forward. Feel free to check out my Instagram at polymath_Sam or go to my website at www.sam-mckee.co.uk.